Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
I can't remember the first time I heard the word redneck, but when I was growing up in Middle Tennessee, it was usually spoken with pride, tossed around at the bluegrass festivals I went to. My grandfather would pick guitar and I'd play fiddle, usually in a circle of old-timers under a shade tree at the Summertown Bluegrass Reunion. That is the opening to an article in the New York Times called The Real Meaning of Hillbilly. And that's the author's words there. Today we're looking at what does redneck really mean? And part of the reason this comes up is as Lance and I have wanted to kind of take on breaking down some of the stereotypes across the political spectrum. It also involves talking about how a lot of the world views the term redneck, or how we think of people that we call rednecks, but where does it actually come from? What does it actually mean? And if we understood that, how might it change our thinking about the word? We're also going to look at, obviously just recently, President Trump spoke for the first time publicly since the inauguration of Joe Biden. And how much should he be covered? Is it really in the best interest of the Republican Party to continue to associate with Trump? Maybe it is. We've got a lot of questions, a lot to talk about today, but of course we couldn't begin a conversation on redneck and the future of the Republican Party without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, I like that definition. I've considered myself a hillbilly since I was born and worn it proudly, as people have called me that as they found out I was from the hills of Missouri. And I have been typecast and stereotyped because of that, and have fought proudly for what I consider the people that brought me up for my sense of fairness and equality. And it was nice to read this article where someone explained that to everyone else, that where this comes from and what it means is totally different than the way it's used. For our word of the day, we'll use Justin's word of animus, A-N-I-M-U-S. Also a noun. Second definition, a feeling of strong ill will or hatred, animosity.
Animosity. I think it works well, though, today, right, Lance? Because the animus that we're talking about comes in a couple of forms. There's the animus towards rednecks, right, from the outside. And then there's also the animus that many people who self-identify as rednecks feel about the rest of society. So I think that's what we try to do here, right, though, is kind of look at it from those angles that both sides are approaching it from.
Try to educate those people.
And in doing so, it's important that we start with the fundamental understanding of, well, what the heck why do we call them rednecks, right? Where does it come from? Where did it stem from? And that's our, Lance is our senior resident historian and friendly redneck liberal. So it seems like he's got to be the perfect individual to share with us not only where redneck comes from, but what it originally meant and what it was a symbol of. So tell us, Lance, what's the backstory here of redneck?
I've heard two backstories. There's the one that's in the article.
Okay.
And it is very much part of the lore and the history of the coal mining region, which Appalachia is a major region for rednecks. And it has to do with some miners back in the hills in the 1920s who were fighting against the man, who were upset with the way they were being paid and the way they were being treated and their working conditions. And they took to wearing red scarves or red bandanas around their neck, hence the term redneck. And they were looked upon as outcasts because they were fighting for equality among the miners and to get paid with something other than company script, which if you don't know what that means that they were working and the company would give them money that could only be spent at the company store. And if you listen to bluegrass music. There's a famous song that was written, a folk song actually, about I owe my soul to the company store, meaning they made sure to only pay you enough so that you could not ever pay off your bill at the company store. So your family would then have to continue to work in the coal mines to try to pay your debt. And kind of interesting, right? The similarity there with the debate on whether or not we should raise the minimum wage and whether or not people should have the right to earn a basic living for their work. We're not talking about people who didn't want to work. These were people who were working very hard in very dangerous conditions who said, I just want to get paid what I'm worth. Some things never change in the United States. Now, the one that more people know about, or I guess I've heard more often, is that those of us who grew up in the South and lived in Appalachia, many of our people were farmers. And so you would work outside, and we weren't into laying around and getting an even tan on our bodies. We were covering our bodies up because we were working hard out in the field behind the plow horses and different things and harvesting the crops and bringing them in, so that when we were done working and we took off our clothes, we had what was called in some places a farmer's tan, where you had a red neck because that was the part of your body that was open to the sun when you were working those 12 and 14-hour days out in the field baling hay or walking behind the plow or whatever. And so hence the nickname redneck for those hardworking farmers in the Appalachia region. So there you have the complete history as I know it.
In the 1920s, the American Constitutional Association was basically working to cover up the stories about the Battle of Blair Mountain, and that the cover-up campaign continues today, right? So something that started in the 1920s, because some of our listeners out there, I mean, when I was reading this article, I kind of thought about, why don't we know about, why haven't we heard about this? It seems pretty relevant. And in fact, get this, to talk about something that you would think would be a major part of our history lessons. It was the largest armed labor uprising since the Civil War. It was led by a group of miners in 1921, as Lance mentioned, that were fed up with working conditions. And the coal companies made sure that students didn't know about the miners who wore red bandanas and organized an integrated army of immigrants, whites, and African Americans decades before Brown versus the Board of Education made it to the Supreme Court. The bandana wearers were called rednecks, and at the time, it was an insult. Their activities were even a crime. And it explains that obviously as time went on, they decided to embrace it and reclaim it and make it their own. But I think that it's really interesting that the state was involved and that you had these institutions that wanted to keep it quiet, that you had these hardworking people who really just wanted fair pay for doing a terrible, awful job. And they put together this really unique coalition of people.
Isn't it interesting how the people who write the history of our country do not want to pay the working class a livable wage so that they can continue to get rich off the back of the workers? That has been a history in this country that no one wants to write in the history books. And we're talking about people that all they want to do is be treated fairly. And then we have to cover it up and put these people down, not unlike what we're doing today. I think there's an awful lot of similarities here between the way the press and history covered the rednecks and the way we're covering the working class and what we're hearing about, a livable wage. The fact that there are so many people coming out now and talking, well, $7.25 an hour. And if we raise that, it hasn't been, minimum wage, federal minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009. My God, what are we trying to do? We're just how are we going to afford this? Well, yeah, while you're sitting there in your $1 million home or multi-million-dollar home running your billion-dollar company, it's really easy to crap on the workers who put you there and gave you all that money and call for lower taxes because, that's going to help the working class because it's going to trickle down. Yeah, Reaganomics has worked, folks, hasn't it? Hasn't it worked really well for the working class? Worked really well for the rich people. Worked really well for the fat cats living on the coast who are making all the money. But what's it done for the working class? The real workers, the people who go to work for 8 to 10 hours a day. What's it done for them? Real wages have not gone up. We've talked about it since 1970. Real wages have not gone up with productivity.
The author of the article, Lance, writes, and we'll let people think about this here. By the time I was born, Appalachian and Southern folks were less focused on fighting wealthy inequality and more focused on stripping away human rights, including my own. Country music shifted to focus more on beer trucks and girls in shorts. Guthrie's brand of country was all but dead. And the thing that I wanted to add to that, and this is not something that the author points out, but that I think is very interesting, is if we trace the historical timeline, and you all know, I'm going to preface this right with correlation does not necessarily equal causation because I don't want to be a hypocrite. And I do believe that's true, but I do think it's notable. Look at, you have the entire redneck situation through the 1920s progressing and the cover up, right, Lance? And then by the time you make it to the 40s and 50s, all of a sudden conservatism has started to shift away from, I don't want to say conservatism because it's its own thing, but the politics of redneck started to shift away from, let's not so much talk about the labor uprising and fair pay for a good day's work. Like let's divert attention away from that and let's focus on getting mad at the people that really cause all your trouble, the immigrants and the gays and the immoral, right? Because those are the people, that's the trouble. Not that your employer's being unfair to you, and not that you were working with the very people that we're now telling you are the issue, right? Let's focus on that. And for the most part, they succeeded in convincing rednecks that no, it's not your mean, nasty employers that you need to be concerned with. It's the immigrants, and it's all these other social-based issues. Those are the real cause of your animus. So think about that and think about what that means for part of what we're also talking about today, which is what's the future of the Republican Party? Trump speaks for the first time in public. What does that mean? Should Republicans embrace this? Should they run from it? What's best? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
I think it's safe to say, Lance, right, that redneck is a misunderstood term by most people. And there are things about it that people understand that are probably correct, like the idea of hard work, right? But then there's a lot of things about it that people have misassociated or disassociated with where it actually came from and the type and kind of people that were actually part of it. Because they were doing some pretty forward-thinking sort of things back around the 1920s. Basically, I mean, you might call it, a protest, but really it was more of a revolt because, I mean, there was armed confrontation.
And I know we're using the term redneck, but redneck / hillbilly, because I've never considered myself, quote, a redneck, even though I've been put there, but I do consider myself a hillbilly, even having grown up in the North since I was a teenager. I've spent more time in the North, but I still consider myself a hillbilly. I still consider myself, that's home. That's where I want to go. Those are the people. And as the author in the article, there are times when I feel great consternation when I go down there to try to talk to them because socially, they're not necessarily where I am, as far as, with their ties to the conservative agenda that we hear from in some of the Southern churches and Southern lifestyles. Yet I've never met a nicer person than when I go down there, and when I take friends and family down there that they don't think in their minds well, I can't like those kind of people. And they meet them. They're very open and very loving, and they're now part of the family group, part of the major group that gets together. And there's not that animus that they had before once they'd been introduced to what it was that they were supposedly scared of or didn't like. And I think it works the same way when you look at the liberals on the coast, when they look down their noses at someone from middle America and says, well, how can you believe this? Da, da, da. How can you think this? Well, you know what? Why don't we just all get together and quit worrying about hillbilly and liberal and conservative, and let's just start treating one another as human beings? I get tired of when I talk with a twang of somebody thinking, oh, you're not smart enough. I've told you the story that when I went from Missouri to Iowa in second grade, I was put in the lowest reading class because I was a hillbilly from Missouri. So of course, the way I talked, no way I knew how to read, even though my vocabulary was a college level vocabulary at that time. But they didn't know that. They just assumed that. And those are the kind of stereotypes we need to break down. So I'll wear the hillbilly or the redneck or whatever you want to say very proudly and very honorably, because those are hardworking people who just want what's best for everybody.
The author says, quote, I was a hillbilly, one used to hearing my family worry about paying the bills and making ends meet. I knew we struggled, but I couldn't see how immigrants were the problem when it was the price of milk that was going up.
Amen.
Yes. On a recent post-election drive home, my eyes couldn't help but snag on Trump flags flying outside what might best be described as shacks. Those folks deserve so much more, but I'm not convinced they'd say the same for me. She draws the connections here and doesn't actually, I don't think, arrive at this conclusion of it's easy to blame those people and everybody bears responsibility for the decisions they make. But I also, the two entities that I am the most upset at, Lance, are the brand of Jim Jordan politics that have convinced the people here in the state of Ohio, in the city of Urbana, where we broadcast, that the reason that they're struggling are not at all the reasons that they're struggling. And they've succeeded at doing this, right? I mean, that's why Trump was elected, because these people honestly believe that what they're being told is the truth, and that if they bear down hard enough, if they support the Republicans long enough, that they will succeed. And I am equally mad, equally pissed at the Democrats for allowing the Republicans to convince the working class Americans that they're what's best for them, that they're out to protect them. And the Democrats just let the Republicans get away with it again and again, on and on. Yeah, I guess so. We don't really care about people in rural America. We don't need them as long as we got our big cities. And it's just, that's not how we're going to move forward. I understand that the Republicans are doing it as a winning tactic in the short term, because if you can take advantage of people and allow the problem to persist with only making a minuscule amount of headway enough, and you can keep blaming the other side, you convince people that they have to stick with you, you know? And they're preying on, Lance, the very hardworking, real work ethic that these people have. And that's the thing that's so upsetting is it's terrible to say, but they're very smart, right? They're playing on there's somebody to blame, and the way we win is by digging in, right? And I mean, to what you're saying, Lance, these people are willing to dig in, right? If that's what they have to do, if they have to grin and bear it, that's what they're going to do. And they're being told that's what you have to do, even as they're living in shacks, right? Even as they're being, not paid a living wage, that's what they're doing, because that's what they're being sold. And there's two entities that are responsible for that. There's the Republicans who are selling it, and the Democrats who are basically letting them sell it, and not really putting up a fight, because they're so focused. And this is the thing that is very frustrating, Lance. Both sides seem overly focused on the social politics of the country, because that's where they have both identified that they can get people to dig in, which leads to what? More donations and money for them, rather than focusing on the things that might actually improve people's lives and that they could actually get some votes done on. The politics are far more concerned with just beating each other up on the social issues, which are some of the hardest things to agree on. And I'll be the first to say that we have to talk about them. The problem is that's become the only thing that we talk about, and it's not working for either side. It's getting us nowhere.
Right. We're not fixing the infrastructure that's falling apart, that hasn't really been addressed since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We've got old roads, streets, pipes underneath ground. You know, we have all this infrastructure that needs to be done that could put people back to work, that could pay them a living wage, that could make us run more smoothly and become even more efficient as a nation. And we won't talk about that because we're worried about who should be living with whom, who should be having children, who has the right to do this and why it's wrong to do this. And we're missing the point of creating jobs for hardworking Americans, for people who want to work hard, who want to just earn a living, take care of their families, pay the mortgage, pay the rent, however they want to live, and be able to get on with their lives the way they want to. And we're missing the boat on both sides because we're not taking care of that because, well, that doesn't matter. We're all part of here in the middle. We're all part of flyover country. None of us matter. No, but they don't care about us. Just what donations can they get out of us and what's the best way to get those donations. Don't make us a part of things. You know, don't give us the broadband we need to be able to get into the 21st century. You know, just keep us backwoods and hillbilly and out of it. Just send us your money, because if you don't, then, oh my gosh, Group X is going to take over and make your life even worse. And that's what, and like you said, that's no way to grow a country and to make the people want to be a part of the change and the difference.
It's the whole forest and the trees thing. I mean, is what it comes down to, I think, as you were talking. That's what the Republican and Democratic parties would prefer, is they would prefer to keep us focused on the trees. Because if they let us see the forest, we'd all say, wait a minute, you know, this isn't working. It's not doing any good for anybody. The whole, you know, well, if we just get control, things will be great. What exactly was great in the 2 years of Donald Trump and Republican control? What was great? I actually want an answer to that. Email us in podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. What did they do for rural America during that time? And right now, the Democrats are undergoing the same test. For 2 years, they have control. What will they do for rural America? Probably about as much as the Republicans did when they had control. The one thing that just, there's a lot of things Trump says, Lance, that upset me. The thing that got me the most was when he was thanking our Congressman, Jim Jordan, during his CPAC speech this past weekend. Because the thing he said in there, not that he was thanking Jim Jordan, but that he said Jim Jordan is a winner and he understands what winning is. And I was like, Mr. President, have you ever looked up this congressman's voting record? Because if you had, you would know he's not a winner. He's a loser. He's always been a loser. Yeah, he wins elections in a gerrymandered district by gerrymandered voters who the Republican Party has tricked into thinking that he's the answer. So no, he's not a winner. He's a loser. He's lost for his district. He's lost for his country. And the only reason he supports you is because you continue to peddle the same garbage that got him elected in the first place and that takes advantage of Lance and I's fellow citizens in this area. And that's what has to stop, because it doesn't just happen here. It also then happens in big cities, in the poverty-stricken areas. That's exactly the same crap that happens to those people, just in a different way with a different message. And the sooner that we all realize that we're all being taken advantage of just by different factions and groups, the sooner that we can do, hopefully, what the rednecks did, right? and say, no, we're not going to take this anymore because we don't have to. What's next for the Republican Party? That is the question that we have to answer next. Is their best strategy move to latch onto Trump or to swear him off? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
CPAC just took place recently, Lance, and Donald Trump's first public appearance. It brings to mind some of the polling that we've seen. What's next for the Republican Party? And I'm not sure that anybody knows, just to be clear. I mean, I won't claim to have the answers. I don't know if you feel like you've got the answers. I don't think the Republican Party knows. And the reason that you haven't seen decisive action on Trump, either to swear him off or hold on to him tightly, you've seen some Republicans do both. You've seen the vast majority of them try to hover somewhere in between there, saying that, yeah, he did some things that are bad, but also not necessarily we don't hate everything he did, that kind of thing. The reason that you're seeing that is because the Republican Party is unsure of if he is the answer to winning in the future.
Out of sight, out of mind. I don't want to speak the name. I don't want to bring it up. I think that we're starting to see, as you talked about off air, some of the Pew research that's been done. The numbers show that his power is waning, that as he's out of the public eye, fewer and fewer people are supporting him and supporting his ideas. And I think that's the way to go. I think that in 2015 and 2016, as he was running for the Republican nomination, he would masterfully used the free press to get his word out. And I think that's what's going on again. And I think we just need to keep quiet about it and let him disappear, because that's not the message. And the concern that I have is not so much for the Republican Party, but are the Democrats going to do the same thing on the other side and just say, well, keep electing us and we're going to help you, and not really help you? It's like, who's going to step up and really help the working class of America? I don't care if it's the Democrats. I don't care if it's the Republicans, but I want somebody, some group, bipartisan, develop a third political party who's going to talk for the working class American. The working class American is not interested in Wall Street. That's not the working class. They're not a part of that. The working class, they're the ones who are going to work. They're the so-called heroes that we keep talking about in our press when we're dealing with the pandemic. You know, the police, the firefighters, the nurses, the bus drivers, the subway drivers, the people who keep going to work, you know, who are packing our groceries, who are working and delivering our products so that we can stay healthy. That's the working class people. And who's out there speaking for them and doing something for them? And quit attacking and saying, well, this is all the stuff that are keeping. No, you folks, the Republicans and the Democrats, are keeping those people down because you're not taking care of the issues that they need. And you're telling them you will, and you're not. And those people need to rise up like the Rednecks did and say, you know what? We're not going to take this anymore. We're going to go across those color barriers, those immigration barriers, those gender barriers, and we're all going to coalesce into a great big group of people that you have to listen to, because we are America. We are the working class. We are the people that make this country run. And you're going to listen to us and do the things that we need done so that we can be a part of this so-called American dream. Because right now, it's the American nightmare for the working class.
Here's the Pew Research poll, Lance. The top line thing that I think caught a lot of people's attention is, would you like to see Trump continue to be a major political figure for years to come? 68% of the nation says no. 29% says yes. But the thing that caught my attention, it's near the end of the piece, Lance, and I think this is the item for concern, right? Not so much Trump, but this part here, because this is the challenge. Percent who say Joe Biden should, okay? So the percentage of Democrats that say Joe Biden should try as best he can to work with GOP congressional leaders to accomplish things, even if it means disappointing some of his own voters. 62% of Democrats or lean Democrats, right? So people who are either Democrats or who lean Democratic, say that Joe Biden should basically try to work across the aisle, even if it means sacrificing some things that his own voters want, right? The very people that are answering this poll, 62%. Now, when we ask the same thing of Republicans, in other words, the percentage of Republicans or people who lean Republican that say Republican congressional leaders, i.e. the Mitch McConnells of the world, should try as best they can to work with Biden to accomplish things, even if it means disappointing some GOP voters. 38%. Almost half. And 59% of lean Republican voters say that Republican congressional leaders should stand up to Biden on issues important to GOP voters, even if it's harder to address critical problems facing the country. I think that, just not to say I'm right, but I think that's exactly what I was saying in the second segment, right? Is GOP leaders are taking advantage of the hard work, fight 'em attitude that people in rural America have. And that's exactly what they're doing right there. That poll shows you everything. They are weaponizing that to stay in power. Rather than get some things done that could help rural America or help the country on the whole, they're convincing people that ceding any ground is death. And that's embodied in the very political figures like Trump and Jim Jordan. I was at an event for Jim Jordan in person with just like 20 or 30 other people. It was a small event. And I asked him what he thought about the redistricting that's about to happen in Ohio, because Ohio voters rose up and said, you know, we're tired of gerrymandered districts. We want them to be drawn via bipartisan commission. And I said, you know, what do you think that'll mean for the state of Ohio and particularly rural counties? And his answer was, all you need to know is that when you hear the word bipartisan, it's a fancy word for liberal. That is a direct quote. And I will never forget that, because I've listened to the man speak many a times. He's our congressman, so I try to pay attention to what he's doing, even though I disagree with so much of it. First of all, it didn't answer my question. And second of all, it was a classic diversion to the problem is bipartisanship. The problem is working across the aisle. Those are the issues. And the reason they're the issues is because if we started to do that and we started to open our eyes, all of a sudden we'd understand guys like Jim Jordan, they're not fighting for you. They're fighting for themselves. And that's exactly what Trump's doing. That's exactly what Jim Jordan's doing. They don't give a damn about helping us. And it's sad that they've used, not Trump so much because he doesn't come from this part of the country, but Jim Jordan's used his background and his roots and perverted them in a gross way to take advantage of voters in this district. And he's just one of, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 in the House, Lance, maybe more, right? And probably 20 to 25 in the Senate that are like that are doing that very thing. And that's what has to change. I mean, for me, that's what it comes down to. I don't know about you, but that right there has to change.
Well, we need more Liz. We need more Liz Cheneys. We need more Adam Kinzingers. We need these Republicans who are standing up. We need some Joe Manchins out there, Democrats who are standing up and saying, wait a minute, let's take a look at this and what's best for my constituents and what's best for my country, not what's best for me. We need people, the Mitt Romneys, the Susan Collinses. We need people who will step away from the partisanship and work across the aisle like we did for a long, long time. It's not a fantasy. It's not a fairy tale, folks. Get out your history book. There was a time when Democrats and Republicans would come together to pass bills that made life in America better. So we can do it again, but we have to demand it. We get the type of government that we ask for. if we don't stand up and ask for there to be some changes, we will continue to get this kind of government, because these are the people who get elected. If we go after those people who do try to listen to the other side and try to work with the other side and say, oh my gosh, we can't have them as our representatives because they're selling out, then we will continue with this kind of government that does nothing for us. So again, we get what we vote for. So think about that as you go to the polls, whenever it is that you have an issue or an office to vote for.
And I just want to say, because I know there's some people out there that say, well, we don't really have any other options to vote for. Then run for office. Don't think that you're below that, because they love to do that too, Lance. They love to convince you that it's reserved for a special kind of people, right? And some of the most successful politicians, quote unquote politicians, some of the ones that had the fastest rise were people who were not those individuals. So the next time that's a problem, talk to friends and family. It's not that crazy, you know. If you don't like what your leaders are doing and there's not somebody running that you want to support, maybe you need to consider running. If you meet the qualifications that are set out in our Constitution or set out in your state's laws or your local laws, those are the qualifications. And if you can get enough people to vote for you, that's it. You know, it's not, don't let them convince you that you need to have gone to Harvard and be a lawyer. And I mean, if you did, great, awesome. You know, if you didn't, that doesn't make you any less qualified to run for office, especially if you think there's things that need to be changed. You have just as much responsibility as the rest of us to do something about it. And hopefully that, Lance, that's what we try to do on this show, right? Is talk about the issues that, frankly, mainstream media doesn't like to talk about either, right? Because they profit from keeping the battle going. So
they stay in power and they stay influential and can reap more advertising dollars if they do this, if they play the partisan role. You're exactly right. But no, our mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We've been honest and open today, that's for sure. And we've really worked at being respectful. But we have some very strong opinions. And we hope that you share yours with us, because that's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we get better, is having these conversations with one another. And if you liked the show today and you like the fact that we're talking about things and we're willing to listen to other people, then tell your family and friends about us and tell them they can listen to us as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is a syndicated radio show and a podcast. New episodes of the podcast are available Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. Eastern Time, and basically heard everywhere podcasts are found. The radio show is heard in select talk markets on the weekends, so check your local station, see if they carry us. If they don't, call them up and tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.